Caddis Maximus here, this time reviewing the GearWrench 82220 adjustable handle or extension handle indexable pry bar. And we'll be comparing it a little bit with this Titan here. This Titan isn't exactly the same type, but I figured it's the best one that I have to compare this indexable to. I'm just doing this mainly as a review of the GearWrench because these are the only two of these indexable I have, and it wouldn't be a real fair comparison to do a versus. And I think with pry bars, when you do a versus video, you really do need to have some situation where you're actually physically testing them, doing something to demonstrate the amount of force that they're taking, which is always the big deal with pry bars, is whether or not they're really going to work out for you when you have a tough situation. A lot of my experience with pry bars is in the machine shop, moving around profoundly heavy pieces of equipment, oftentimes measuring, the weight is measured by the thousands of pounds. What's really surprising is that you can use not a very large pry bar to just tip up and walk pieces of equipment that weigh, 2,000 pounds or more, like a heavy-duty milling machine. It's not easy, but you can just pick it up and get it to move over. It's called pinching. Enough about that. These indexable pry bars have really kind of come of age in the last, it seems after the 2000s there was another rush of a bunch of different types of tools, and these were one of them, versus so many of the standard pry bars. I have a demonstration here. Sometimes they have, usually they have a small hook like this, or like a crowbar will be a small little foot that's angled up a little bit more steeply than such as this. This would be a Klein pinch bar. I'll review that later. But this is what a lot of pry bars people are used to. They're either this, they're crowbars, or they're styles that might be used for construction and demolition, such as a big DeWalt bar like this made for tearing out studs. These are obviously extremely handy because of the indexable head. That's one of the things. And they also come with this kind of a strange, more like a cat's claw type hooked prying end. And that's one distinguishing feature of these. And then the beauty is, like on this GearWrench, we can see the head design. We have two prongs and a single in there. And there's some notches in there, kind of like a ratchet. So when you push this down, it releases that, and you can move this into, somewhere between, over 10, 12 different positions. And so that's one of the big advantages of these, is that you can take and get this hook in just the right situation. If you need to be under something and pry it this way, you can. You can do it straight on like this, where the hook is kind of offset, and obviously you can be all the way over here. And that really makes it a huge advantage, because then you can get the angle of the prying bar and exactly where you need it for optimal leverage. It also allows you to pry something up, and if you're not like lifting where it's going to return back to the position if you remove the pry bar, but if you're prying something off and then you run out of range, what's nice is that you can re-index it, get into a different position potentially, and then continue your prying work. These GearWrenches have set themselves apart. This is the mid-size one, I believe. They have a smaller one, and I've seen an even larger one. And they're kind of innovative, where they have this ratchet, or not a ratchet, but this integrated extension handle. This pry bar is pretty heavy duty. The extension handle, the pipe is really thick, and you can see the end, which takes all the load, is a forged piece that appears to be friction welded. And it's actually pretty solid. So what this is, it just has a quick button, and then you have a series of notches, and it snaps in real nice. It does have a pinch here to prevent it from going all the way down, although it doesn't ever get that, well, I guess it does get that far. And so I thought that was kind of nice. And you have a huge amount of range. It's almost, I would say it's 18 inches of range from the shortest to the longest. And that's really one thing I thought was absolutely genius, is that you can have a nice long pry bar and have tons of leverage to actually break whatever you're breaking free, and then you can shorten it down and then continue your work once you've broken the object free without having to swing a huge long pry bar handle, which has always been the issue with pry bars, is you need a big one to get something started, and then after that you need a smaller one just to continue going. And so this gives you kind of the best of both worlds. And surprisingly enough, I was a bit worried about this hex bending, but it is 5/8. It is pretty darn strong. Definitely a high-grade tool steel. And to tell you the truth, even with the handle all the way extended, I've had this to where this was deflecting. I was putting a lot of force, nearly standing on it. And to tell you the truth, I was a bit worried about it bending, but it didn't. Even after that, it still slides in nice and smoothly. So these aren't unlimited duty. They're not going to do the same amount of work or the level of work such as this heavy-duty Klein pinch bar, but they're really still quite excellent. Now, this is a Titan I just wanted to compare to. They do make these types of bars, several manufacturers do, but there is some differences. Like on this Titan, it's just the opposite. The fork is on the handle portion rather than the head, and on this Titan, you actually have to press buttons on both sides. And GearWrench does have tiny ones as well, just like these Titans. But really, the cat's claw design on these, and just having all that kind of articulation, really has just made these really just amazing for me, to tell you the truth. The one thing I would like to see is maybe one designed more for construction work, where they have some kind of area on the back where you can actually hit it with a hammer, because these could be quite useful in a variety of construction activities, service and repair, and things of that nature. But oftentimes you need to drive the pry bar in between two pieces of wood or something, hammer it in there so you can actually pry it apart. And then these aren't something that will take that. You cannot just hammer onto the head. I'm sure it will break or damage the mechanism. And so that's one upgrade I'd like to see, is, you know, a more construction oriented version. But to be absolutely honest, if you didn't have any pry bars or just have a simple crowbar and want to get more of a professional pry bar, this GearWrench would be one of the ones I'd highly recommend, because it is really a bunch of different pry bars in one. The articulating head allows you to get in a variety of situations, and the extension handle allows you to have a high torque pry bar as well as a smaller, more compact one. And then this little Titan came from O'Reilly's, and really, if you got this and then this little Titan, that would cover just about everything you'd need to, or most of the situations that you might need an indexable pry bar for. And I think the last things to show on this GearWrench is there is a hole in case any moisture or anything that gets inside the handle area, it will drain out. It also allows you to put a little bit of oil inside there. They do have really nice knurling. It's not the best, and you can see where it's been double stamped, so they could improve on the knurling, but it's still pretty good. And I did want to point out on this GearWrench that these have these serrations in the back of the jaw, so when you're prying against some kind of surface along here, it helps prevent it from slipping. And I also thought that was a nice touch. On the smaller Titan, they don't do some of those things. The big advantage of the smaller Titan is you get a real sharp edge, so it gets in between transmission cases and things like that. Anyway, that was my review and overview of the GearWrench 82220 indexable extension handle pry bar. I really appreciate everybody watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. Catus Maximus out.